Hey everyone, Max at 343 Labs here. Today I'd like to show you a clip by one of our instructors, Justin Beck, where he shows you how to correctly compress your kick. Now this clip is taken from 343 TV, which airs right here on our YouTube channel several times per week. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe below, and let's get into it.
In terms of compressing a kick drum, like, why would we compress a kick drum? Let's start with that, right? So there are really actually like only two reasons to do it. One of them is to increase the impact of the kick. And the other reason would be to actually increase the average level of the kick. So those are two different things. So funny enough, even though a compressor reduces dynamic, I keep hitting the mic. Even though a compressor reduces dynamic range, we can also actually use it to make it seem like it's increasing dynamic range. And in that sense, what I mean is we can use it to accentuate transient information. And so the more that we make a transient pop out and dominate a signal, right, the punchier it's going to seem. The bulk of your peak information with the kick is going to probably be somewhere between 50 and 75 milliseconds. So if I want to accentuate the transient, if I want to make my kick snappier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my attack slow so the transient comes through. And then I'm going to set the release pretty fast. Long enough so it stays clamped down, though. Let's try 100 milliseconds. Let's try 50. And set my ratio, 5 is fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to eat into the kick now, about 3-6 decibels. All right, so one thing to keep in mind with contemporary styles of compression, right, is this side chain, right? So we have side chain compression available in Ableton as well. But using a side chain in a compressor is not what most people think it is. So when I click this sidechain button, this isn't enabling some external source to trigger the compressor and cause ducking. What this actually is saying is I can set a frequency below which no compression occurs. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 200. I'm going to go ahead and look at my kick real quick. And there's a lot of juicy info. Around 200 and below. Right? I don't really want to reduce any of that. That's nice and fat sounding. So what I'll do is I'll set my side chain to 200 hertz. And what this now means is that there won't be any gain reduction below 200 hertz. And exactly, this is what Riley Gain just said is super important, right? You may remember that the last time we discussed compression, we talked about how low frequencies are disproportionately louder than high frequencies, right? To the effect of about a 30 decibel tilt in this case, right? So what we see here is that our peak information is so much louder than this information that if we're compressing, all the first 15 decibels of compression are just going to be reducing everything below 400 hertz, which is the exact opposite of what I want to do on a kick. I want to keep that area really round. But I'm also down to tighten up this area from 200 to 400. That's fine. So that's going to hit the compressor first, that area, right? So you'll notice if I turn the sidechain compression off, we have gain reduction. If I turn it on, we have no gain reduction. The compression stops. That's because the threshold now needs to be way lower to hit compression. In fact, when I turn it all the way down now to negative 36 decibels, you'll notice that I'm barely even getting that much compression. And so part of that is because the information we're now targeting is so much quieter than that low end. So another thing that I can do now is I can potentially increase my attack time, make it faster. Right about there. Those 15 milliseconds are making a big, big difference. So what I've now done here is I basically used my compressor as a transient shaper. You can hear how much sharper and punchier that sound is now. The top of it. If I increase my ratio, I get a nice kind of limiter effect that's happening just on the frequencies above 200. There really isn't that big of a difference in gain. We're not actually losing that much gain. Maybe we do a tad, half a decibel of makeup gain. Maybe even a little more. So now you can really hear, or hopefully you can hear, how it really sharpens There we go. It really sharpens that top transient, right? So this is one way to make your kick much snappier. Now, alternatively, what we also can hear is it's eating up a little bit of that 400, 500, 600 range, which is fine. That's what we asked it to do. Now, if I adjust my knee, I'm going to get more aggressive compression the higher the knee is. It's called it's what's called a hard knee. And you'll hear I get a much smoother compression with the low knee. So you see we get more compression as well with the high knee. A little bit less compression, which is why it sounds smoother. We even barely can perceive the compression. There we really start hearing that smackiness a little bit more. Now, if I wanted to drive, this is also something that's really important about how to use compression, okay? Let's say I want to get more snappiness out of the compressor. And what that's really going to entail is just getting more compression, right? I don't want to change any of these values. I can just take my gain utility and drive the compressor. So I get more compression. So what's cool about this, right, is my low frequency information has not changed. What is changing is that the kick is getting sharper and punchier. And it's going to cut through a lot more. And the low end is now tighter sounding. The reason that the low end is tighter sounding is because our ears are kind of stupid. Our ears can be tricked really easily. And so what's happening is that we are adding more and more high frequency information, the more that we compress. So make no mistake about it, it's going to sound way rounder and warmer without compression. But the reason for that is because we're reducing the dynamic range so much that all of this information is being brought higher, to the effect actually of about 5 decibels. If you'll remember when we were talking before, right? Before we compressed it, there was like this information was hanging out at about -15. Now it's much higher. There's no longer that 30 decibel tilt. So yeah, essentially, this is one way to apply compression to your kick, to make it sharper, make it tighter, right? One of the reasons we make it sharper and tighter doing it this way is because by adding more high frequencies, we're making the speakers give a more kind of linear output, right? But also we're making our ears be tricked and focus less on the low end. So that's really what's happening. The low end hasn't changed at all. It just seems quieter. Same exact volume. So this is like basically limiting your kick, but without fucking up all the important information, right? Now, if we were to exaggerate this experience even more, you can see even just from rolling that extra 100 frequencies up, now we keep that warm 909 sound, but we're still getting a lot of compression in the transient. So this is kind of the way to achieve the happy medium of warm but tight, right? So the sharpness of the transient is going to cut through, but the warmth of the low end will remain. So that's how you really lock your kick into place, right? You can achieve this with one compressor. You don't need to do that much crazy shit, right? Now, when it comes to EQing in conjunction with compression, like one thing to notice is this thing going on right here, right? It dips but then peaks again, going below 20. So that's a bad thing. We want to cut that out, actually. Now, you may have heard me in the past talking about like, oh, you don't want to EQ out your low information on your kick drum, your subharmonic information, because that actually is going to take away the weight of it. And that's totally true, but you do want to take it away when you see a peak going up in the ultra lows. That little increase right there is telling me that there's actually a lot of mud that's being generated that I don't want. So I'm just going to cut it off right at that mud point. And that already makes it sound more elastic on the speaker, making it bounce and be a little more rubbery, right? We can see now that it's giving us a much more warm response, a much more linear response. Now, here's an important concept, right? If I wasn't using this sidechain EQ, and we'll get into why that is, right? If I wasn't sidechaining the information on the kick, right? So not compressing everything below 338, I would definitely want to do this before the compressor, right? Because this information is going to trigger the compressor. So if you're going to make a low cut, then you want to do it before the compressor, right? That's really all there is to say. If you're not using the sidechain. If you are applying a sidechain EQ curve to your compressor, then you can EQ after. It doesn't really matter, right? Now, the other thing to bear in mind is what's going to inevitably happen is this area from about 2K to 10K might become a little bit harsh as a result of this compression, because these are the frequencies that are going to be really boosted the most as a result of reducing the dynamic range. Really right there. That doesn't sound very nice. So one thing to do after you've done this compression is reduce a little bit. So what this now allows you to do is get a super tight, warm kick sound, right? So I'm almost always going to do a little bit of EQing after I compress something a lot. And this is a lot of compression. Don't be fooled, right? Anytime you're doing more than 3 decibels of compression, it's pretty much a lot of compression, right? So that's what the sound is before the processing. That's the sound after the processing. Right, so we know it's a little bit less warm. That's okay. So what we also could do would be to add back some of what we lost around here. Even though it's side chaining, it's still going to, it's an 18 decibel per octave curve, so it's still going to get in there a little. Now, the best way to gain stage in this process is to focus on the impact of the low end, right? The roundness of the low end should not be changing perceptually because we're using this sidechain filter, right? Right, so on my end at least, there's no difference in the warmth. So what there is a difference in, though, is the it's jumping out of the speaker way more with the compression now, right? And so the reason that I'm hearing that now is because that's what's getting louder. The transient is what's getting louder. I made that shit louder. That's the point of this style of compression. So this is a flat kick with not a lot of energy, and that's a really highly gained kick. I apologize. I thought I was turning them all on. So flat kick, no energy. Kick with snap and a little bit of gusto to it, right? Flat and dead, alive and punchy. The low end hasn't changed, right? So, yeah, Esteban, to your question, as Dot Initial mentioned, I do a very extensive tutorial on compression in our saved. If you go to our video section of 343 Labs, our 343 TV, you'll find the video there. Okay, anyway, so that's that first way to approach compression on a kick drum. The other way to do it, actually, just real quick, I want to show you something on this compressor. Something that's really cool is that guy. Is this valve, which is supposed to emulate a tube. Which is just going to completely get rid of any harshness in the highs, which is sort of what tubes do, if you hit them hard enough. So that's going to kind of undo. We'd have to reset up the compressor to still get the snappiness while using the valve setting. But that valve is really cool. It's a great way to get kind of analog color in the box. All right, so the other approach to to compressing this kick, I'm going to turn off this processing so we can keep it. I'll just duplicate the track and mute it. The other approach is to actually target the transient with a really fast attack. And a longer release. We'll still go high ratio. So check out what this is going to do. Okay, let's figure out what's going on over here. There's something weird. Oh, right. That's why. Output gain is down. Okay. So let's go back to this high transient. Cool. Really fast attack. Okay, so in this case, what you'd be doing is you'd be sort of trying to do the same thing, except you'd be doing it in a slightly different approach, like an inverted principle. So this time you're going after the low frequency information with a really fast attack to catch all of it. And what's happening is that the compressor is creating a snap. So weirdly enough, this is actually going to give you a bit of a warmer response because it's really compressing everything. So whereas before there's a moment in time when the dip occurs and just inherently there's going to be a little bit of resonance created at that point because our ears are going to notice a drop off. There's not really going to be as many harmonic artifacts in this approach to compression. That's a little too much, right about there. So in this approach, you really don't want to do like a lot of compression. You only want to really get 2 to 3 decibels. Right? And what you can hear is, again, this adds energy and life. Now, something to bear in mind with this approach. My attack is so fast that literally nothing's getting through the compressor, right? So it's immediately reducing. So release takes on a slightly different function now. The release time now is going to actually determine how quickly, if there's a bounce kind of in the kick drum. If we're reducing and it's popping back up, right? So this is why you have to be careful with release. I'd set my release to about 50. And so what you can actually do is with this approach, and this is where compressors are like super crazy, is you can add a little bit of bounce to the kick by shortening the release time. What's now kind of happening is we're creating this very subtle wavering in the volume because we're reducing it so quickly, right? It's being compressed immediately. What's really happening is that we're kind of actually saying only compress the first 13 milliseconds, which is super fast, which is probably just like right about to there or so, right? And then we're saying release. So what's happening is is we're getting this little. Oh, that's really helpful. Dot initial. Thank you. I'm gonna try that out because I really want that reverb back. So yeah, what this is basically making happen, right, is that the compression is so fast that we're actually creating. It's really weird. By reducing the transient, we're also creating a little bit of a transient because we're hearing the snap, right? What happens with a realistic compressor is that when you reduce the volume, it actually like kind of creates this snapping sensation. This happens with analog compressors if you really compress. And so we're sort of getting this snapping sensation. We're sort of actually shaping the transient even more, adding something that's not there. Especially because we're releasing so quickly. So we're just really quickly just making this moment. So it's super subtle, and that's the point. Right? With this approach to compression, we're not looking to do too much reduction because then we're eating up the low end. All that we're really doing now is creating a bit of life, right? So I don't know if you can hear it on your end, but on my end, there's like a significant increase in the sense of kind of bounciness and livelihood, and also the harmonics are just woken up a little bit more. So if you wanted to add a bit more snap after this technique, right, then you could go into an EQ. One of my favorite EQs for adding high end is from Acoustica Audio. It's ridiculously high on CPU, so I highly recommend none of you buy it unless your computer is super powerful. And I would just go to about 8K and then boost. Maybe even about 12. That's super nice. So as you can hear, we're going to have very similar results. Now, obviously, that first one sounds a little more powerful. But it also sounds tighter. So it's just two different types of approaches, right? The release time, we're literally getting more of the fatness because we have a slower attack on the kick on this one. Whereas this one, since we have a faster attack, we're really focusing on tightening, right? So in terms of applying a compression to a kick drum, you can think of it like this. If you want to keep the fatness of it, use a slower attack time and use that first approach that we were talking about, right? If you want to just tighten it, right, and you're not so concerned necessarily about how full it sounds, but you want to just have the lows be punchy, then you would use the fast attack approach, where you would do a lot less gain reduction, right? But you would sort of create a little bit of that more snappiness. So it's really a matter of preference and style. It's not like one of them is better than the other. I personally like how this is kind of a little bit tighter in terms of how the high frequencies are represented. But this is also more true to the original sample. This one, right? This one, this one's snappier because we're adding the snap from the compression. The This one's still snappy, but it's warmer, right? So I could get that same snappiness by throwing on this EQ and targeting same frequency area. That sounds really nice too. So as you can hear, just using different styles of compression, I'm able to take the same sample and shape it into something very different. This is warmer, a little bit more of the harmonics. This is cleaner, less harmonics. Still pretty punchy. Yeah, so this is the magic of what a compressor can actually do when you apply it properly. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to go ahead and stick with this one. I really like that. That's like a really nice sounding kick. I don't know what in the previous example the attack. Yeah, so in this first example we did, it was only adjusting. Yeah, the MJUC is super sick. It's modeled off Fairchild Retro Instruments and one other one that I forget. But there are 3 great modelings in there. Esteban, right? So in the first one, the release is super fast because the attack is slow. We want it to jump off right away. And then it's everything above 338 hertz. It's getting compressed. And the second one, it's faster attack. So it's just, yeah, Veramute comps are super sick. I have a Manley Veramute sitting in front of me, like a real one. That's what I use for compression. I don't really use digital compression that much. But you can still get awesome sounds with digital compression. So I personally tend towards the one where you allow the transient through because it comes out of the speaker more. But if you're making a mix or a production where you don't actually want the kick to be so apparent but still be powerful on the low end, then you would opt for this second one, right? Easiest way to think about this is that if you have a really fast attack, you're going to take the sound and push it further back into the speaker. If you have a slow attack, you're going to allow the sound to jump out of the speaker more.
Thanks for watching. And don't forget, 343 TV goes live right here on our YouTube channel several times per week. And if you want to learn more about music production or just want to join our community, you can find more information at 343labs.com or 343labs.de for our German website. See you next time.